What's up, everybody, and welcome to First Round Frenzy. Matt and Cole back at it for the NFC North. Cole, this is your division, so this should be an interesting one. Uh, and let's get right at it.
Yeah, I'm excited. This is going to be a fun division. Obviously, I do a lot of work in this division, and I've been a avid fan of this division for quite a while. So, interesting time ahead for the NFC North.
Yeah, and it's a very, very good division, one of the best divisions, if not the best division in all of football. Three playoffs teams this past year, and a very young Bears team who currently hold the number 10 pick, who, if everything goes right with Caleb Williams, which is a big if at this point, they could be a very special team and get up into that conversation with the other three teams in the division.
Yeah, I mean, this team starts with Caleb Williams. I mean, this team's going to go as far as he can take them. But with Ben Johnson now in there at head coach and a coaching staff that is full of competent coaches, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Um, he now has like all the ability to take this team to new heights. And I'm excited to see what this Bears team can do. Are they going to win 12 games and take the NFC North crown and go on a playoff run? I don't think it's going to be that drastic in year one under Ben Johnson. But year two with Caleb Williams under center, I think is going to be a lot more improved than the 5-14 team we saw in 2024. I mean, I'm looking at maybe like again a 9 or 10 win team out of the Bears this year and try to get a wild card spot. And what they've done this offseason has been tremendous. I mean, absolutely overhauling that offensive line. Joe Thuney, who, let's start with him. I mean, he's coming from the Patriots and the Chiefs, the two greatest dynasties of our lifetime, Matt.
Yeah.
And he worked on with both teams, and now he's going to the Bears, one of the
Key
worst
member of
teams
both of those
in our
teams as
lifetime.
well.
Yeah, key member on the offensive line. And I think he's going to be a day one captain for
Oh,
this team. And then you got Jonah Jackson joining back up with Ben Johnson to start at right guard. You got Drew Dahlman, the top ranked center on the free agent market. Dayo Ondangbo, I love that guy off the edge. I think he's oozing with potential that the Colts never got to get out of him. I think Dennis Allen can get it out of that game. And then Grady Jarrett, another veteran leader, veteran presence on the interior of that defensive front. There's a lot to like about all the offseason additions this Bears team made over the
yeah.
last couple of weeks.
And I think the veteran leadership is one of the most important parts of this entire team because there's been so much dysfunction throughout
Right.
over the past decade plus of this organization. And you're hoping that it's different this year. You're hoping Ben Johnson and Dennis Allen and some of the other coaching staff that they brought in here is going to bring stability. But I think having that veteran leadership on the field with Joe Thuney and some of those other guys that you mentioned is going to be really huge for some of these young guys like Caleb Williams, who,
Mm.
needs a little bit of motivation, we'll say, to kind of keep his hopes high because as you said, they're probably not going to jump right into a playoff spot this coming year. It's a very tough division to try to get into the playoffs. So to kind of keep your hopes high and keep moving forward and doing what you got to do, having that veteran leadership on the field is going to be important.
Yeah, and the other important thing is that beyond these young guys and beyond Caleb Williams, there is so much dysfunction with this team is that seeped into the veterans they already had in the locker room. I mean, you saw DJ Moore, the energy just completely got wiped out of him throughout the year as the year went on, and he had no motivation by the end of the season. The defense completely fell apart by the end of the year. And I mean, even the defense, they're bringing back 10 starters on the defensive side of the ball for Dennis Allen's new crew. And then the offense pretty much bringing back all the same playmakers as well, outside of, the new revamped offensive line, but all the offensive weapons remain the same. DJ Moore, Adunze, DeAndre Swift, Cole Kmet. So they got to build a new culture into the guys that are already in place and the guys that they're inheriting. And it's going to be a big challenge for that new coaching staff. So we'll see if they're up to that challenge and can get this team back on the right track. But right now, I think all the starting pieces are in place and this team's set up in a really good spot going into the draft.
Yeah, and you talk about that, a lot of returning starters, which means a lot of familiarity with each other, which should be really
Yes.
good for
Yep.
Ben Johnson and Dennis Allen to get this team going early. So now we're moving on. They obviously did a great job in free agency building up the offensive line. That was one of the biggest needs going into this offseason. We saw Caleb Williams in college, whether it's his fault or not, had a problem with sacks. Comes to the NFL, has a problem with sacks. Again, we talk about Shador with this all the time when we're going during this draft process, is he needs a good O-line. You finally get that. What's next on the agenda for this team? We're heading to the draft. What are the positions of need here for the Bears now?
I mean, I don't think you should stop attacking the trenches. I mean, yeah, the starting five up front on offense is in place and the starting four on defense is in place, but you need more depth. I mean, we saw it from the Philadelphia Eagles. Having depth on the defensive line is key. Pass rusher, pass rusher, pass rusher after each other is key in the National Football League. So, do they go with a top edge rusher? Do they go with a Mason Graham if he falls to 10? That would be ideal in my mind. But at the same time, on the offensive line, you definitely need some reassurances at the depth, in the depth, in the entire room. Ben Johnson talked about you don't win football games with five offensive linemen, you win with 7, 8, 9, 10 offensive linemen. So they don't quite have those guys behind the starting five. They also have, some issues at left tackle. Braxton Jones is coming off a serious injury and he's going to be out until training camp. So do you bring in help at left tackle? He's going into last year of his contract too. So a future left tackle, I think, is a key need. But a lot of people love the running back. And they need a number one. Ben Johnson's offense killed it with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. He's got the Jahmyr Gibbs type already there with DeAndre Swift, but he showed during his first year in Chicago he can't carry the full load. So is that if Ashton Genty's on the board at 10, potentially, maybe even a trade back and get Marion Hampton, go with one of the day two backs. But yeah, trenches and running backs seem like the key pieces to look at for this Bears team right now.
All right, then let's get right into it here. 2025 NFL draft. We already talked about it. They've got pick 10 in the first round, 39 in the second round, 41 in the second round, as well as 72 in the third round. Kole, who do we have going in the top 10 for the Bears?
Yeah, I mean, these top four picks are key for the Bears because they're really good selections. All four in the top 75. And we talk about the top 70, 60, 70 is the heart of this draft. And if they get some good value on some guys that start to slide, this would be incredible. I love Mason Graham, but I don't think he's going to be there at 10. Someone I also am not sure of yet, but I'm gonna go with it, out of the sake of the 3 round mock. I'm gonna go with Ashton Genty at 10. Running back out of Boise State. I mean, putting this guy in Ben Johnson's offense is gonna absolutely elevate that offense to an entirely new level. Not just in the run game, but he can be a weapon out of the backfield. And this lets DeAndre Swift play his best game. The runs on the outside, catching the ball out of the backfield, and you just let Ashton Genty carry the bulk of the workload inside the tackles, can help take this team to a new level. And it's what Ben Johnson wants and what he worked with successfully. Second round with the 2 picks, I got Josh Connerly Jr., the tackle out of Oregon. Because like I said, they need to shore up that long-term left tackle spot. The market skyrocketed. Braxton Jones has been serviceable at best, but you're not going to pay him a Jalen Moore or a Dan Moore contract next offseason and keep him there as that starting center or starting left tackle. And that's a key position for Caleb Williams. So I like Josh Connerly. They're already meeting with him as well on a top 30 visit. And then the second one, pick 41, I got Princely Umanmielen. That might be, I don't know. This guy has a weird process. I think right now that sounds like a little bit of a reach at 41. But the length this guy has is a perfect fit for Dennis Allen. And he also played at Florida with Jervon Dexter. So yeah, he once he gets back in the building next week and the players get there, I think he's going to try to push to get his old teammate on the roster in Chicago. And then the third round, I'm going to add some speed in the passing game and Isaiah Bond. The Bears had Ryan Poles and Eric Bieniemy at the Texas Pro Day. And then right after the Pro Day, it was being reported that they're potentially going to go meet with Isaiah Bond. So he's had some little character issues starting to crop up here. I know that Ryan Poles passed on George Pickens in the second round because of his character issues. We know Jalen Carter, he traded out of that pick with the Eagles so they can get Jalen Carter because of his character issues. So we'll see. That's something I'm looking at right now to see how true those issues are with Isaiah Bond. That might change things. But right now, I mean, that speed dynamic, they need that on their offense out of the wide receiver room.
Yeah. And I think the Bears, they're a very interesting team, especially early on in the draft. We've talked about how Ashton Genty might be gone at 6.
Hmm.
So do you go with the next best running back in Marion Hampton? Do you go offensive line with Will Campbell, Armand Membu, Josh Simmons, somewhere there? That was the early pick at 10 early on in the class. And then we've seen Mykel Williams potentially be the pick there. So it'll be interesting to see, especially if Ashton Genty ends up being gone. As reported, it's looking like the Raiders are more and more likely to select Genty. So it'll be interesting to see what they do there with pick number 10. The other one that I had a question about was Josh Connerly. He's
Hmm.
someone that I think a lot of people have said could potentially be better on the right side of the offensive line rather than at left tackle. Is that something that you took into consideration here, taking him so high in the early part of the second round?
Well, since they're showing interest in him and wanting to meet with him on that top 30 visit, I think they're comfortable keeping him on the left side. The right side's already locked up. You have uh, Darnell Wright there. You just drafted 10th overall 2 years ago, and he's been progressing great in his career so far, and they're excited to see him take that next jump going into year three. It's just getting that left tackle, I think, is really important, and Josh Connerly seems to be the best one that they have their eyes on that fits, this offense and the direction it's heading. But with that first round pick too, back to pick 10, if Mason Graham, Ashton Jeanty, and Tyler Warren, who's getting a lot of buzz this week, if all three of those guys come off the board before 10, I think the Bears are going to try to trade out. The question is, will a team be willing to give up day two picks to move up? Probably not. So it'll be interesting to see what happens if Graham, Jeanty, and Warren are all off the board. At that point, do you go with Will Campbell? Do you reach on Amari Hampton? I mean, right now they have a lot of options. So I think they're still sitting in a good spot regardless of how the board falls for them.
All right, so let's move on to probably their most feared rival, the Green Bay Packers. Your team for the longest of times, a lot of stuff up and down, but it seems like they're kind of getting into the groove here. Still a lot of needs, but get right into it, Cole. How have they attacked the team so far this offseason?
Pretty interestingly, I'm not really too happy with the moves that they made this offseason. They paid Aaron Banks buttload of money to come in, and they don't really know, is he going to play left guard? What are they going to do with Elton Jenkins if they play him at left guard? Are they going to move him to a new position at center? Jordan Morgan, last year's first round pick, where are you going to play him at? Because there's talk you put him at left tackle. What are you going to do with Rasheed Walk? Like their offensive line is just they got a bunch of pieces, and they just got to figure out the puzzles of what they're going to put all these guys after losing center Josh Myers. That makes things interesting as well because I think they kind of wanted to try to get him back. But then they got Nate Hobbs at corner. It's really the only cornerback addition they made, which is interesting with the Jair Alexander situation continuing to unfold. Are they going to trade him? Are they going to cut him? Do they want to keep him in 2025? So that's interesting because Nate Hobbs is really more of a slot guy. So then you're going to move Keyshawn Nixon to the outside. So I think cornerback one has to be the top need, especially if you trade Jair Alexander. But after Jair went down, that position really struggled in Jeff Hafley's defense. So I want to see what they do there. And then the wide receiver, I'm slowly losing faith this team will ever sign another, top level wide receiver again. Mecole Hardman's not that guy. I mean, he feels the need for Christian Watson in the speed department, while Watson, battles back from that knee injury and hopefully gets back later in the season. But it sounds like from what Matt LaFleur was saying at the league meetings this week that he's fine with just rolling with what they got and making it work. So we'll see what happens there. I still think they add a wide receiver at some point in this draft, but it's it's not going to be
We
early.
all know that the Packers thrive in choosing second round wide receivers. So we'll see where you have a wide receiver in your mock draft. But the Packers are a team that, they can compete. They
Yeah.
played well all the way throughout the season. Jordan Love obviously had his ups and downs. But wide receivers one position where since Devontae Adams left, they really have struggled to kind of find the right person to take the reins. So is that something where you're trying to look for another wide receiver too here, or is it all fit and just kind of trying to plug the pieces together there?
I think it's just the fit. Getting rid of Devontae Adams was key that Matt LaFleur didn't want this team to run through one person. He wanted this offense to run through the collective. So, Jaden Reed is the gadget, Romeo Dobbs is your jump ball, Christian Watson as your speed, and also a physical presence there. Dontavian Wicks, they really want to, hopefully ramp him up and get him going on a consistent level. The two tight ends, Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft, offer a different element to the passing game as well. And then really this offense is, turned into the run with Josh Jacobs. And it's seeing him be the workhorse back that he was and being one of the top rushers in 2024, I think was a good sign and gave them a lot of confidence in his ability going forward after giving him that contract. So I don't think it's more so after not getting DK, not going out and getting Ayuk or anyone like that. It's clear that this team is relying on the collective and going to do so again in 2025.
All right, so let's get into here. They have pick number 23 in the first round, pick number 54 in the second round, and pick 87 in the third round. So, Cole, we've had some disappointments with the Packers before. We've gone through this 6 years together here with the Packers picks. Who do you have going here for the Packers?
All right, should I go with who I have going with the Packers? Because it's not going to happen. Or should I go with who I think Brian Gutekunst is going to draft for the
Both,
Packers?
tell us both.
All right. The guy I want them to draft, and I've been saying this for a while now, is Derek Harmon out of Oregon. Because I've seen the run game absolutely be horrible for the Packers my entire life. Last year, they were seventh in rushing yards allowed after getting Jeff Heffley in, and that was a really big turnaround for that defense. But I think Derek Harmon will make that even better. His specialty is as a run defender and a run stuffer, and I really wanted an edge rusher at a time, early in the process, but it seems like that it was more of a coaching issue last year, and handling the talent they had because Rashawn Gary, Lucas Van Ness are first round picks. They want to get production from those guys and not try to find a way to replace them. So I'm going to go with the interior with Derek Harmon as the guy I want. We'll see what happens. I think Shamar Stewart's getting a lot of buzz. I mean, Brian Gutekunst loves his high RAS scores, and he had a perfect 10 and fits the scheme really well. I hope to God he's off the board because the guy had 4.5 sacks in his college career, and that was the big issue at that position was we couldn't get the quarterback down. So I don't know how Shamar Stewart really helps you in that regard. But I think that's going to be Brian Good against this guy. But I hopefully we get Derek Carmen at pick 23.
At least it's not another corner in the first round that's going to do absolutely nothing. So, maybe switch it up just a little bit.
Yeah. So in the second round, I'm going to go with the corner here, though, and Trey Amos. I think that they're showing a lot of interest in this guy. I don't think it's enough interest to maybe potentially view him as a first round guy for the Packers at 23, but I think they're hoping he's there at 54. But he's someone, if they get rid of Jair Alexander, you can rely on him being your top boundary corner. Keyshawn Nixon as your number two, and then Nate Hobbs in your slot gives you a pretty good core starting at that position. And then third round, pick 87 here. I'm going to go with the wide receiver. I'm going to go with Jalen Royals. It's the guy that I mentioned, I
That
think.
seems like a Packers pick right there.
Yeah, I think I mentioned like off the record with you before, but I like Jalen Royals' fit. He seems like a Matt LaFleur guy. And yes, he's from Utah State. I looked at it. He did not overlap with Jordan Love, unfortunately. But they might have some
Love was
mutual
there forever.
yeah, they might have some mutual connections and be able to hit the ground running with each other, which could translate into a good connection on the field. So I think that he fits that offense of what they need with the pseudo wide receiver one, but still being able to work with the collective with the group they have.
Yeah, I mean, this seems like the prototypical Packers draft, right?
Yep.
In the first three picks, you go corner, wide receiver, and defensive front. It seems like that's kind of been the equation that they like to
Hmm.
do. Those are the value positions in the draft, the positions that kind of have the most turnover throughout the years in terms of talent and talent regression and stuff like that. So,
Yep.
this seems pretty realistic in my mind. And I think it fits a lot of their needs, right? We're talking about adding some skill positions in the passing game. You're saying you want to get Dontavian Wicks more involved there. Every single person has their down weeks in that
Yeah.
offensive system there, right? Christian Watson's had his troubles with drops. You're talking about Dontavian Wicks just not getting targets. Then on the defensive side of the ball, there's been so much turnover in the talent just because, you don't pay them or they
Yeah.
just don't perform like they should have performed. So this seems like I would not be surprised if this is the exact way that the Packers draft goes at the end of the month.
Yeah, and I mean, if they get Derek Harmon or even Shamar Stewart, just someone defensive in the first round, I think they're going to have a really strong defense next year. They were really excited about Edgerrin Cooper, the rookie second rounder last year, and Javon Bullard, and even Evan Williams, the fourth rounder out of Oregon. Those three guys came in and were, immediate difference makers for that defense with their new defensive coordinator, while still having Rashawn Gary, adding in Xavier McKinney into that, back into that secondary as well. There's a lot of really good pieces on here, and I think Jeff Hafley did a really good job coordinating that group. So it's more so just trying to get that production out of the defensive line and getting after the quarterback that can really take that unit to the next level.
All right, well, let's move on to the team that Kole and I probably have had some nightmares about over the past few weeks with the thought of Aaron Rodgers continuing the Packers tradition of moving from Packers to Jets to Vikings, seeming very unlikely at this point. But The Vikings are a team that was led by other former Jet, Sam Darnold, to the playoffs. They fell apart in the last week of the season and in the first round against uh, arguably the best overall team or second best behind Philadelphia in the Detroit Lions. They do not have much going for them in terms of draft capital this year. They only have 2 picks within the first 3 rounds, pick 24 and pick 97 in the third round. But they're a team that, I think they can get back to exactly where they were last season, right?
Mhm.
I mean, Sam Darnold obviously had the best season of his career. Kevin O'Connell is a quarterback whisperer, right? He will get the best out of JJ McCarthy if he ends up being the starter this year. They've got a great offense. Aaron Jones. They brought in Jordan Mason via trade. Obviously, you've got Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. Wouldn't be surprised if at some point they add in a third wide receiver at some point during the draft, probably later on. And then they already addressed a few of their needs so far. I mean, for me personally, I'm looking at outside corner. I'm looking at the interior of the defensive line. I'm looking at the offensive line in multiple areas, but more importantly, in the interior. We saw that get exposed really badly in those last 2 games of last season. So that's definitely something that I'm looking at early on. But they also brought back some key pieces as well, like a Byron Murphy, right? He
Yeah.
was key for their secondary in a very weak secondary group. So they have a lot of holes, but they did a good job in kind of patching things up for now, and then potentially getting some big time players and big time contributors during the draft.
Yeah, I like what they did in, the free agency. Getting Javon Hargrave and
Yep,
Jonathan Allen,
I forgot about him. Yeah,
those are two, that's like a top D tackle combo,
yeah,
especially working with Brian Flores is absolutely insane because we saw how good Jonathan Grenard, Andrew Van Ginkel, those guys were last year rushing the passer. Now you add in two veteran, proven interior threats in Hargrave and Allen. Those are really big moves. And the interior of the offensive line, two veterans there from the same team, Ryan Kelly at center, and then Will Freeze at right guard. That helps shore up that protection for JJ McCarthy and keeping him up in the pocket. But that's, the story of this team in 2025. Who is JJ McCarthy and how good is he actually going to look under center? Because this team was a 14, or 12, what was it, 12, 14 win team,
13-win team, I believe.
13 win team
Almost
last
13.
year. How,
No, it was
what's,
14. They were tied with the Lions. There was the controversy.
yeah.
Yeah, 14.
So having that record last year, and now you hand the reins over to a guy who's an essential rookie. What kind of drop are we going to see from this team, or is he going to keep him at that same level and be that guy they expect him to be after not adding in anyone else to this room and feeling confident getting him the reins? So I'm excited to see JJ McCarthy ball out.
Yeah. I mean, my opinion. JJ McCarthy was my number one ranked player in the entire class last year. Him and Bo Nix at 1 and 2. I think a lot of the hate he gets is a little bit undeserved just because Michigan's style of play wasn't to throw the ball. Doesn't mean that he can't throw the football. And we saw that during the shorts. It's preseason, right? But in the short stint in preseason, he was balling out. He was placing passes like perfectly. I mean, he was running the offense really well. We'll see what happens. Once you get into the regular season, it's a completely different animal. Then once you get into the postseason, as we saw with Sam Darnold, completely different animal. So we'll see what happens. I have high hopes for JJ. But I think for me personally, it's more about keeping him upright, keep giving him time in the pocket. We know we have the weapons to be able to get the best out of him, and then make sure he doesn't have to score 30 points a game. We
Yeah.
don't want a rookie quarterback essentially to have to do that, even though there's potential that he could with the system that they have in place. You don't want to have to do that. So I think that's where they're probably going to attack early, keeping him upright, and then making sure he doesn't have to be a hero.
Yeah. So after what we saw from these free agent additions, what would you say are their, main pressing needs of the Vikings, and how do you think they're going to try to fill those in the draft?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, it's got to be secondary and the interior offensive line. I mean, I know they already addressed it with Ryan Kelly and Fries in free agency, but I think the Vikings offensive line has been a revolving door over the past few years. They've had guys that have had some good seasons, and then it falls apart the next. I think having a young guy in there could be interesting. I'm looking at potentially Tyler Booker or Gray Zabel early on, or you're going with one of the Georgia guys if you decide to wait and go on day two, whether it's Dylan Fairchild, Jared Wilson, or Tate Ratledge. For me personally, when I go into the first round, I'm going after the secondary. I think that's one of the most important needs for them right now, especially since Byron Murphy is more of a slot corner. He's better in that position than he is outside. So I think having a slot, getting an outside corner is going to be a priority for this team, which is why with pick 24, I went with Maxwell Harrison out of Kentucky. I was kind of choosing between him and Jahdae Barron. I personally think Jahdae Barron will be gone by this pick, but as much as I love him, if he's available, I think Maxwell Harrison fits what they need better. Jahdae Barron's best position is in the slot as kind of that nickel kind of player. Get him up on the line of scrimmage, make some impact in the run game as well. He's very capable of playing outside. But if I'm a coach and I'm him as well, I want to go into the place where I'm going to have the most success. And I think the most success for him is not going to be as a full-time outside corner. If you have confidence that Byron Murphy can play on the outside, then go out and get Jahdae Barron. That's the pick. But for me, I think Maxwell Harrison is the pick here. I wanted to go Benjamin Morrison, but I just think based on what I've been hearing, he's not getting any first round talks. So it's either Maxwell Harrison or Trey Amos. And I went with Maxwell. I think he's the kind of guy that can get in there, extremely athletic, quick, and a guy that can be an immediate starter and make an impact on this team. Then we go to round 3. Big gap for them here. I think the Vikings would love to have more picks in this day 2 range. As we talked about, they did fill some holes, but they need some depth here on this team. And because I went defensive back with round 1, I ended up going Jared Wilson out of Georgia at pick 97. I think this pick is going to be best available offensive guard. I went Jared Wilson just based on consensus. I think that's probably the range that he could potentially go. But I mean, I already mentioned Dylan Fairchild, Tate Ratledge. I mean, Wyatt Millum out of West Virginia. He's a guy that can play across the offensive line. We're looking at Jonas Avanaya out of Arizona. Marcus Embo, if he drops, would be great there. But for me, I think Jared Wilson can play center, can play on the guard at either side, and extremely athletic. Great combine performance from him. So I think he might be the pick there in round 3.
Yeah, that sounds pretty solid. I mean, especially Jared Wilson coming in could be the long-term center because Ryan Kelly's already 31
Yep.
and has dealt with some injuries in the past. And then Max Harrison's a good corner. But what you were saying with the corners, some might fall into the back end of the first round or early in the second round. And seeing the gap from 24 to 97, I wonder if Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah
Yep.
tries to do a trade back and acquire some more, maybe a second round pick or some early third round picks. Try to get a team to jump back into the first round, I think will be key because then you can still get your corner if you move back a couple spots. And then, maybe you don't get Harrison at that point. Maybe if you go back behind Buffalo and Buffalo takes them like I had in my mock, but you can still get, like you said, a Benjamin Morrison or a Trey Amos if you move back just a tad bit. So I wonder if that's the key there because, yes, that's a big gap. I didn't know that 24 and then your next pick's at 97 in the third round. I would like to see them get some more draft capital, but it makes sense. They moved up to get, and JJ McCarthy and Dallas Turner last year in the first round, and now you're seeing the repercussions of that by not having those second round picks in this year's draft. So I wonder if they make some moves and potentially in the first round.
Yeah, and I think that's key. If you go back a few weeks when we were talking about the AFC East, I had the Patriots trading up with the Los Angeles Chargers. One of the
Hmm.
other teams that I named as a potential trade back candidate was the Minnesota Vikings. If their guy isn't there, right? I was thinking about potentially Derek Harmon here with this first round pick as well. They need some help in that interior defensive line as well. Luckily for you, this time around, the Packers have the pick before the Vikings instead of the opposite way around. But they are a prime trade out candidate because I think they would benefit a lot, even if they
Yeah.
traded out of the first round completely. I'd be perfectly fine if they traded with the Patriots, got an early second round pick and another day 3 pick, or day 2 pick. If they were able to do that, that would be huge for them because then you go with one of those corners, Benjamin Morrison, Maxwell Harrison, Trey Amos, Azariah Thomas, Shavon Revel. there are so many that kind of fit in that 35 to 55 range. That's where we think they're going to go. Get one of
Mm.
those guys, then potentially go earlier with the interior offensive line. Get one of the, more highly touted. We're looking at Tyler Booker potentially dropping out of the first round. Is he a guy that you can get early day two? So I think that if they were able to trade back, that would be the ideal scenario for the Vikings here, unless they are in love with a player that is available at 24.
Yeah, and as we get closer, I mean, this all depends on how the board goes, but as we get closer and closer, I think we see 3 to 4 trades from 24 to 32 in the first round because teams are going to move back and then move in. We saw a little bit of that action last year of teams moving out and in, but I was like in the late like 28 to 32s. I'm going to give it like a little bit more of a window and say 24 to 32. I think we see 3 to 4 trades this year.
And I think because those premium positions like edge rushers are so top heavy right now, right? You're getting some of those guys like a Shamar Stewart who could potentially drop to the later half of the first round. Nicky Manwari, Malachi Starks, who are kind of in that 24 to 32 range, right? And then teams like the Vikings, like the Chargers, who, they want their Colston Lovelands or their Amarian Hamptons or, corners, wide receivers who, you're looking more value at second and third round. You're like,
Yeah.
all right, let's see, can we just flip flop? Right. And I think
Mhm.
you're right. We're going to see 3 or 4 of those in that final third of the first round.
Yeah, and we know how valuable that 5th-year option is too
Oh,
as a
yeah,
first round pick. So that's
exactly.
another thing to consider. So now let's switch over to the top of the food chain in the AFC North, the reigning champs, the Detroit Lions, the big cats in this division, Matt. They got close. It really came down to the wire between them and Minnesota, but
Yep.
Detroit all season long looked like the better team. But just like Minnesota for a first round exit though in the playoffs. So now we're gonna see what Dan Campbell can do. He lost both coordinators. Ben Johnson going to the Bears that we just talked about. And then a couple weeks ago we talked about Aaron Glenn going to your New York Jets. So so Dan Campbell, this is a big season
Yep.
for him. MCDC, what kind of coach is he? Is he a product of his coordinators, or is he going to prove that he's just like Nick Sirianni? It doesn't matter what you say about him every year. He's going to be at the top of the NFC, and he does not care about all the talk. So, what kind of Dan Campbell we're going to get? Is he going to revitalize this team and get them back on the ground running in 2025?
And I think that's exactly what I wanted to start off with because the Lions have had a very, very tough last few decades. You get Dan Campbell, you bring in some new life to this organization, you turn this franchise around, and you bring multiple winning seasons, you make the playoffs, you win the NFC North, and then you lose two of the people that a lot of people are saying is the reason why they were successful, right? Ben Johnson's offense, Aaron Glenn's defense, and Dan Campbell is just a figurehead, right? He's a guy that brings the energy and
The cheerleader.
a little bit reckless sometimes, right? So it'll be in. This is one of the most important seasons in Detroit's entire history this coming year to see can they figure this out and replicate what they've been able to do for the past few years. I personally do not have any reason to think why they shouldn't, right?
Mm.
I think they have all the tools necessary to be able to win at the next level. Um, Jared Goff, is he the best quarterback in the NFL? No, but he knows how to run this system better than pretty much anybody, right? You still have Sonic and Knuckles in at running back who is going to carry this team, right? And then you've got Amon Sam Brown, Jamison Williams, Sam Laporta, who had a down year last year. If he picks it back up, the offense is going to be even better than it was last year. So I think if they end up sticking with a very similar system, we'll see what happens. Obviously, when new coordinators come in, whether they're from within the organization or from without, they kind of like to put their own little twist on the system or bring in an entirely new one. It seems like they're probably going to keep a very, very similar style of offense. We'll see what happens. The biggest concern for me is the defense. I think even with Aaron Glenn and how good he was last year and how good of a play caller he is, that defense struggled, especially when Anzalone was injured and he wasn't in there in the middle of the defense. I think there's a lot of holes there, and I think they are going to have to figure something out if they want to succeed this coming year.
Yeah, and I don't think there's a roster bringing back more than the Lions.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean, they did not have that much turnaround in terms of talent loss versus talent brought in. They lost a big time corner and then brought in DJ Reed to fill that hole in that secondary. And then they got Avonte Maddox as well, Rocky Sin. Those are really the only big additions the Lions made to that roster, was just adding in some corners to an already good secondary. And this defense was one of the best in football.
yep,
And then they had injury and injury and injury and 14 more injuries.
yeah,
And they still were fighting and clawing every single game to the last breath. So it'll be interesting to see. Yeah, that defense without Aaron Glenn, I think is more important to see how they do in 2025 than the offense without Ben Johnson. Because as good of a play caller and innovator as Ben Johnson is, like you said, I think they're going to try to run a similar system, and you have all those tools still in place. The wide receiver room still intact. The tight end position still intact. The offensive line is still one of the best in football. The running back duo is the best in football. Jared Goff was an MVP candidate. Give him the
yep,
flowers. He was an
yep,
MVP candidate. So we'll see. I think that offense still sticks and does a really good job even without Ben Johnson. And the defense is just whether or not they can stay healthy. Because
yep.
Aiden Hutchinson was a beast, and he should be defensive player of the year if this guy can play 17 games.
100%. And you mentioned Jared Goff being an MVP candidate. I think people are saying, "Oh, is this can Dan Campbell continue doing what he's been doing these past couple of years? Can Jared Goff continue what he's been
Yeah.
doing these next couple of years?" Right? You're looking at this. He had his struggles in LA. He got traded to Detroit so that he could get a change of scenery, try to figure things out. He was the number one overall pick in the NFL draft, right? Like he is a big time prospect, a lot of hype coming out about him. He comes in, Ben Johnson turns him into an MVP candidate. Without Ben
Hmm.
Johnson, is he going to be the same player? We don't know. I've always been a fan of him. I think he's got the tools to be able to do it, but we'll see. I think this is going to be a big year for him to kind of prove the doubters wrong.
Yeah, I mean, because we've seen him with Sean McVay and we've seen him with Ben Johnson, arguably the two top innovative offensive minds in football right now. What is it going to look like with John Morton coming over from the Broncos and running this offense now? And definitely, I think the all eyes aren't really on John Morton as they are Jared Goff. So definitely nailed the head right there because we haven't seen what this Jared Goff could potentially look like without two very good offensive innovators.
Yep. All right. So that's pretty much what they haven't changed much in
Yeah.
terms of free agent. They brought all their older players back. They bring in DJ Reed and a few depth pieces along the way, and
Yep.
they're kind of running it back, right? That's what they're doing. So we get into the draft time here, and it's just about plugging those holes.
Hmm.
They've got pick 28, pick 60, and pick 102 in the first 2 days here of the NFL draft. There is some gaps there, as you can tell. Are they a trade back candidate at 28? Maybe. Um, if the guy that they like isn't there, I mean, edge rusher is obviously a huge need for them. If they don't like who's available at the value at 28, do they trade back and maybe get into the 40s or 50s, maybe even late 30s to try to get a guy with a little bit more value?
Hmm.
That's a possibility. But I think edge rusher and offensive line are probably the two positions for me that are most of need for the Lions.
Yeah, and this Lions draft to me, and you probably will get into it with your picks, but this screams sustained future success. I don't think this is a draft for the 2025 Lions. I think this is a draft for the 2028, 2029, and 2030 Lions. So this is, like you said, they don't really have that many holes. They're bringing back so many guys. They have so many guys already locked up, and that other guys they need to pay, like Jahmyr Gibbs coming up on a contract, Aiden Hutchinson coming up on a contract. So to me, this is drafting your guys for the future to absolutely turn this Lions team into a dynasty. So we'll see what moves they make in the move that you have for them. But yeah, I agree. Like offensive line, they're getting older at that group. And then edge rusher, they saw some real major concerns after Hutch went down. So adding another guy there potentially could be a major need for them.
I think the Lions are kind of in a point in in their team here where they have to toe the line very carefully between making an immediate impact and having guys that are going to be here for a long time and, make an impact 3, 4 years down the line.
Yeah.
Because they are in win now scenario, right? They have a very, very good team and they have the potential to go out and win a Super Bowl in the next 3 years. But if they don't, they still have enough young talent that
They
they
can
can
rebound.
maintain some success and
Yeah.
revamp very quickly. So you kind of have to see, all right, whoever's on the board here, this guy can make an impact right now, but his ceiling is much lower. So do we go for this guy who might need a little bit of time to get going, but has the potential to lead us into the future? So I think that war room on draft night is going to have a lot of question marks as they come to their picks.
Agreed. Yep. So let's see
So
what you got.
yeah,
3 round mock draft.
yeah. So at pick 28, as I mentioned, they are potentially a trade back candidate. But for me, they go with Tyler Booker, interior offensive line out of Alabama. He's a guy that's been slipping. We've talked about him potentially at Miami all the way at 13. Now we're talking about him potentially slipping into the second round. This is a guy that, for me, is immediate impact, right? He's a guy that's going to come in. He's one of the best leaders in this entire draft class. We've heard about this from many sources around the Alabama football team that he was the guy, right? He is someone that is going to, do exactly what Dan Campbell loves to do, is just lead. I've had the quote, I forget what it was, but at the combine, he said he just loves to see his defenders like on the ground. That's what he loves to kill defenders. That's what he loves to do. I don't have the exact quote. I closed it out here on my computer, but he's the kind of guy that Dan Campbell would want to have on his team. And he's a guy that, we've talked about. The reason why he's sliding is his pass protection isn't his strong suit, right? He's more of a guy that thrives in the run game. And that is what Detroit does, right? They're guys that rely on the run game. And he's going to be a guy that just sits in there and demolishes dudes while while the running backs go crazy. So I think if he gets 28, there are going to be conversations about his ceiling, right? But I think if they like him and they think that he can be a long-standing leader on this team, I think he's the pick at 28.
Yeah. So the quote you were looking for, just real quick,
Yes.
was he makes guys not love football.
Yep.
That was the quote from the combine. That's
That
absurd.
it's he's a beast, right? I mean, I went against him when I was in middle school, and he was the exact same way. He made me not want to play football when I was running the passer. Trust me. I ended up not playing after that year, not because of him. But still, like he is a mauler on the offensive line, and that's the kind of guy that Dan Campbell loves in his locker room. So I would not be surprised that they either get him at 28 if he's there, or trades up early into the second round to potentially get him if he keeps falling, because that is a Dan Campbell coded player if I've ever seen one.
Definitely.
Then we drop down a lot. Pick 60, end of the second round. Again, wouldn't be surprised if they, end up getting a pick a little bit earlier with a trade back or a trade up. But I go Jack Sawyer, edge rusher out of Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
I think this guy, again, perfectly toes the line between immediate impact and potential for the future. He's a
Yeah.
guy that in all 4 years at Ohio State, he's gotten better, 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 better. Better production every single year, continues to go up. The amount of tackles he had went up every single year. The amount of sacks he had went up every single year. The amount of pressures he had went up every single year. And he's a guy that's going to come in, and he's not going to start right away. You've got Zadarius Smith. You've got Aiden Hutchinson. But if one of them were to go down, he can step right back in. He's a pros. He's going to get out there, and he's going to get after the quarterback. And I love his ability. I have him in my top 50 players. He was in my top 50. He's still in my top 50 after some changes. And I think he's a guy that eventually, when Zadarius Smith ends up leaving Detroit at some point, him and Aiden Hutchinson can be a very, very good pass rush duo in the future. And finally, in round 3, pick 102. We get out of the top 100, and we've talked a lot about, Jared Goff. Is he the future of the Detroit Lions? He is slated to become the highest paid quarterback in NFL history in, I believe, 2 years' time. It goes up to 55 million is his contract. And then 2027, there's an opt out. So, do they go out and get a potential replacement? And for me, I went Jalen Milroe out of Alabama.
Oh,
This just screams the perfect situation for him. I was thinking either Detroit or Seattle because they're both in the situation where they have a quarterback locked down for the next few years, but they're unsure of whether they are going to be able to. And Oakland, sorry, Vegas, Las
yeah, the
Vegas
Raiders.
with Gino.
Gino.
All three of those teams have quarterbacks locked down for the next 2 to 3 years, but are unsure of after that, or if they're even going to last those 2 to 3 years. Jalen Milroe, we've talked about this a lot. He's my quarterback 6, I believe, right now. He's moved up a little bit. He's a guy that needs 1 or 2 years. He needs to sit. He needs to develop as a passer. And in all three of those teams, you've got Geno Smith, Sam Darnold, and Jared Goff, who are
Yeah.
teams that they're not the most athletic quarterbacks in the league. They sit in the pocket and they throw the football. Jalen Milroe needs that. So I think when you look at Detroit, you have an elite running game. He'll add a lot to that. I could see him coming in short yardage situations this year and making an impact in the red zone, right? Take Jared Goff out and just let him bulldoze people on the goal line, right? Have your own form of tush push if it ends up not getting banned. And then develop him slowly. You don't have to rush. You've got Jared Goff locked down. Obviously, it didn't work with Hendon Hooker, right? He ended up dropping. You drafted him. Maybe something comes out of him. Didn't happen. You go out, get high upside. He probably has the highest upside out of any quarterback in this draft. He just has one of the lowest floors. So you go out, elite arm talent, elite athleticism, sit behind Jared Goff, see if you can have him use him in certain situations to make up for Jared Goff's lack of athleticism and let him develop. There's no pressure on him. He can just sit there, do whatever he wants, progress, and then eventually when his number's called, he can be a guy that can potentially make something happen. If not, you reset. I mean, you've got Jared Goff locked down for the next few years. So if Jalen Milroe doesn't work out, there's plenty of quarterbacks that are going to come later on. But I think if he drops to 102, I think it makes all the sense in the world to go out and get him.
Yeah, I think of all the mocks we've done so far, this is probably the best one, I would have to say. All the teams we've done so far, because this is perfect. I mean, I'll start with Tyler Booker. You look at this Lions offensive line. I talked about how they're a top unit in football. You got Taylor Decker at left tackle, Graham Glasnow at left guard, Frank Ragnow at center, and then Penny Sewell at right tackle. The only concern is Christian Mahogany at right guard is right now on paper the starter on the depth chart with no real competition there. Tyler Booker would be an immediate starter at that position, and him and Penny Sewell on that right side would be dominant in the
Oh,
run game. Absolutely dominant. And not just for 10 years, they would be dominant together. So that's incredible. And if they can get him there, and why not? I mean, he's falling. You take him if he's there.
exactly.
Round two, Jack Sawyer, it makes all the sense in the world. I like Josiah Stewart, but I don't think Josiah Stewart's going to be there,
I
especially
was
after
I
all the
was gonna
talk
do
of,
yeah. I
yeah,
love Josiah Stewart and putting him with his Michigan. Well, they didn't play together, him and Aiden Hutchinson,
the
but
two Michigan guys.
two Michigan guys. But I had him going to the Ravens, so I kind of switched it up. I
Yeah.
Josiah Stewart I had like weeks ago, but Jack Sawyer or him, either one. I love both of
hmm
them there.
Yeah, both of them fit that role, just being a high leader from a very strong program
Yep.
that are both productive as well. So it's a toss up. Jack Sawyer, Josiah Stewart.
Whoever's available,
So
whichever one,
whoever's
go for it.
available, yeah. And then Jalen Milroe, I've talked about it. We did the quarterback show when we talked about the Senior Bowl before that. I said that this guy needs to sit for 2, 3, maybe even 4 years behind a quarterback to really hit his stride and hit his full development as a passer. And this is like the perfect situation. I mentioned Detroit as a perfect situation for him. And yeah, if he's on the board at round three, you pull that trigger because Hendon Hooker's is not going to work out. You're not getting Teddy Bridgewater out of his retirement for the second year in a row. So it makes all the sense in the world for them to be the Jalen Milroe team and the team that would make it work in the long run. potentially with his development.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question in the world because outside of the Lions, I think the perfect fit for Jalen Milroe is the Philadelphia Eagles, and they are obviously not going to start Jalen Milroe anytime soon with Jalen Hurts. But
Yeah.
that's the NFC North. I think if everything goes right, we can have four teams with going over 500 in the next few years. A
Yeah.
lot of talent within this division. So, as we always do, Cole, are there any changes to the standings from last year for the NFC North after free agency and what we have planned here?
I think all four of these teams are going to be pretty good. And I think Detroit comes out on top. I don't know if the Packers quite can challenge them yet, but we'll see. If they, take a stumble without their coordinators and Dan Campbell's not all Dan Campbell is made out to be, maybe the Packers can jump them. And I'm worried about JJ McCarthy. Until I see some action and like legitimate on-field action against non-preseason players, I'll feel a lot more comfortable about this Vikings team. But I think they have the whole team around to elevate him. But I don't want to do it. I don't want to put the Bears above Minnesota. But is there a world where all four make the playoffs?
Oh,
I
that
mean,
would be
do we have
that's a
three
lot.
wild card teams in the same division? I don't know. I don't know if the Bears quite reach. I think Bears would be like a 9-8 missed playoffs team,
Yeah.
if I had to say right now. And then Minnesota as one of the Minnesota and Green Bay as the wild cards, and I'll say Lions is the one.
I think, yeah, for me, I think Lions make sense. I think they're the best team in this division. Um, the 2 and 3, I think for me, it's either Minnesota or Green Bay. The question is, what JJ McCarthy are we getting? Are we getting very, very good JJ McCarthy, or are we getting everybody's opinion on what JJ McCarthy is going to be? Right.
Yeah.
Um, if so, I think it's just going to go Detroit, Green Bay, Minnesota, Chicago.
Chicago.
If we get good JJ McCarthy, I could see them potentially finishing second. I think it comes down to the division games for that. But for me, I agree with the Bears. I think they're a team that are kind of in between 6 and 9 wins. I think
Yeah.
that's where they're at. I think they need to get that second running back in order to make Ben Johnson's system work. And you need Caleb Williams to play football, right? We saw flashes, but we also need to see him, throw the football more than 5 yards down the field more consistently. So it'll be interesting to see. I think we're going to get generally the same order, but maybe some flip flop in the middle there with Green Bay and Minnesota.
Yeah, and I think with the Bears, there has to be so much that goes right for them to be successful in 2025. I mean, Dennis Allen has to have a top 10 defense out of the gate. And Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson, they can't have any hiccups. Like week one, they need to have everything ironed out all summer. And week one, they hit the ground running. But man, if this team in Chicago
They
can
hit their
hit,
potential there.
if they hit that potential, they would be such a fun team. I mean, I would love to see Caleb Williams emerge as a top quarterback next year, but I just don't think. I think those two can do it, or those three, Dennis Allen, Ben Johnson, and Caleb, all working together one day can get there. But I just don't think it's 2025.
Well, so heard it here first. Not much change in the NFC North, but it is going to get a hell of a lot more competitive over the next few years. So that's it from us here in the North. Next up, I believe we'll do the South. So we'll go
South, all
AFC
right.
South on Monday, NFC South on Thursday. We are officially in April. We're in draft month. So just a few weeks away from the NFL draft, and things are getting ramped up here. So we're excited, and we will see you next week.
All right. See you then.